The Sunday school lesson for December 1st, 2024 is Jesus' Ancestry. Ruth chapter 4, verses 9 through 17, and Luke chapter 3, verses 23 and 31b through 32. Welcome, viewers and subscribers, to my channel, Read With Me. This is an audio reading of the lesson with intermittent commentary. If you have not done so, please help this channel grow one viewer and one subscriber at a time by subscribing to the channel. Please like, comment, and share this audio with others. Thank you so much for all that you do to help this channel grow. Verse 9. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon." Boaz's desire was to redeem Naomi's land holdings and to marry Ruth. The laws regarding selling a family property are found in Leviticus chapter 25, verses 25 through 34. The gist of the regulation was that a sale of Israelite land was more of a lease, since the land would return to the seller's family when they could afford to redeem it, or at the latest in the year of Jubilee. Leviticus chapter 27, verses 16 through 25. Because of the importance of land in Israel, the bias was to sell the property within a tribe to keep it in the extended family. For this reason, the family member who purchased the land was called a guardian redeemer or kinsman redeemer. And though property was generally inherited from father to son, there was precedence for a woman's holding land. Numbers 27, 1 through 11. When a nearer guardian redeemer abdicated his right to buy the land and marry Ruth, Boaz stepped in. In doing so, he took on the role of a guardian redeemer for Naomi by buying the land that had belonged to her husband Elimelech and her sons Mahlon and Kilion. At least 10 elders were present, along with many people. Witnesses at this time served much like an oral form of a notary public for such transactions. Verse 10. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses. This is the first time we learn that Ruth had been Mahlon's wife, not Kilion. This identification was likely due to the legal nature of the proceedings. Boaz repeated the phrase, "Today you are witnesses," identically worded as in Ruth chapter 4, verse 9, creating bookends that open and close his formal legal argument. There would be no doubt in the future that Boaz acted with integrity in redeeming the land or marrying Ruth. The language around marrying Ruth is like that of Levirate marriage. But a few details prevent its exact characterization as such. First, Ruth was a Moabite, not an Israelite. The two people groups, though related, were often at odds with each other. God had even barred Moabites from being grafted into Israel. Second, Boaz was not a surviving brother of the deceased husband. He wasn't even Naomi's closest guardian redeemer. Third, the guardian redeemer who Boaz approached as first in line was not publicly shamed as Levirate law required for declining to marry Ruth and redeem the land as a package deal. This unnamed man serves as a foil to Boaz. The man acted in keeping with conventional wisdom and was not reprimanded for doing so. In contrast, Boaz exhibited extraordinary integrity in his zeal to provide for Naomi and Ruth. He honored the spirit of the Levirate law with his concern for Mahlon's family line, that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. The first child born to Boaz and Ruth would be raised as Mahlon's child, with his inheritance so that the dead man's name and property would be maintained. By using the language of acquiring both land and a wife, Boaz combined the Levirate law in principle with the kinsman redeemer concept. Verse 11. Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem." This all took place at the city gate, the typical meeting place in Israel for legal proceedings. Going above and beyond their role as witnesses, the people pronounced a blessing on Boaz and the new household that was forming. The blessing clearly focuses on Ruth, the woman, as a blessing for Boaz, would more likely call for the Lord to make Boaz like Jacob, Rachel and Leah, and their maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah, bore the ancestors of the tribes of Israel. To have standing and be famous are blessings for wealth and a good name. The name probably assumed the couple would require children to experience these blessings. Luke chapter 3, verse 32. Ephrathah seems to be an old name for the area of Bethlehem, also called Ethra, most famously mentioned in the messianic passage of Micah chapter 5, verse 2. Rachel, especially, was associated with the area as she was buried near Bethlehem. Though Ruth was a Moabite, she was also known to be a woman of great character. She left behind her own people because of her love for Naomi and the Lord, without knowing what reception she could expect in Naomi's home. The blessing from the people confirmed their acceptance of her and hints at the Lord's pleasure with her. Verses 12 through 13. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. In verse 12, the account of Perez's birth is found in Genesis chapter 38. Tamar was entitled to a Levirate marriage when her husband died. But several failures found Tamar back in her father's house with no prospect of continuing her dead husband's lineage. When she tricked Judah into sleeping with her, Tamar conceived Perez and his twin brother Zerah. Ruth's situation was not identical, but it is notable that both Tamar and Ruth were foreign women who became ancestors of Jesus. Matthew chapter 1, verse 3 and verse 5. In verse 13, it is unclear that Ruth did not bear children in her first marriage, which lasted approximately 10 years. In hindsight, however, we might sense God's invisible hand preparing her for this moment. The Lord's aid in her conceiving a son emphasizes his blessing of this union, even though historically the Moabites were not to have any portion in Israel. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 3 through 4. Verses 14 through 15. The woman said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, for who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Verses 14 through 17 focus on Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law. The women of the town had previously witnessed Naomi's heartbreaking return to Bethlehem. Ruth chapter 1, verses 19 through 20. Naomi concluded that the Lord had left her bitter and empty at the death of her husband and sons. The reality was that God provided for Naomi even when all hope seemed lost. This was a great reversal for Naomi. Praise be to the Lord acknowledges his action, especially that this action reveals his loving character. In verse 15, we see that in Israel, grown children were expected to take care of their aging parents. 1 Timothy chapter 5 verse 4. This was especially true if their mother was widowed, as women had very few financial resources to fall back on if family could not help. Following the death of her husband and sons, Naomi's future was much in doubt. With the birth of a grandson to renew her life and sustain you in your old age, Naomi need not be burdened about her future. Even as the women celebrated this grandson, Ruth was extolled as being better to you than 7 sons. This is quite incredible given the status a hypothetical mother of 7 sons would enjoy in Israel. Those sons represented security in the future, especially in widowhood, and the hope of accrued wealth. Verses 16 through 17. Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. It was not uncommon for well off families, as Boaz's seems to have been, to have nurses for their children. In Naomi's case, the role is not that of a wet nurse, but as a guardian and caretaker. An informal adoption might be in view. This is the only place in the Bible where neighbor women are said to have named a baby. Ironically, there is no evidence to suggest that these same women honored Naomi's request to be called by a new name. The name Obed means worshiper or servant, the latter meaning lending itself to the idea that he would serve as a redeemer for Naomi one day. That he became famous throughout Israel came to pass through his son Jesse, who became the father of the greatest earthly king to reign in Israel, David. Verse 23. Now Jesus himself was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. He was the son, so it was thought, of Joseph, the son of Heli. A Levite could begin serving in the tabernacle at 30 years old. Numbers chapter 4, verse 3. Although other texts reflect ages beginning at 20 or 25 years old. These differences could reflect the variety of roles that were available at these ages. New age limits set in the temple rather than in the tabernacle or changing supply and demand in demographics. In any case, Jesus' age certainly would have qualified him to minister in the temple. Luke adds the editorial comment that it was thought that Jesus was the son of Joseph in order to be clear that, in reality, Jesus is God's son. But Joseph, was legally Jesus' father. Many scholars believe that Luke's genealogy reflects a family tree traced through Mary, such that Joseph was the son-in-law of Heli. Or it could be that Matthew traces through Mary's family and Luke through Joseph's. Other proposals for the differences have also been put forward. Nonetheless, we need not be perturbed by the differences between Matthew and Luke. We also do well to remember that the ancient genealogy was not intended to be a complete accounting of a family. Neither account needs to be taken as mistaken or corrected against the other. What follows in Luke chapter 3, verses 21, 24 through 31a, not in our printed text, are generations from Matthew, from Mathout, to Metatha. Verses 31b through 32. The son of Nathan, the son of David, the son of Jesse, the son of Obed, the son of Boaz, the son of Salmon, the son of Nahshon. Nathan was a son of David by Bathsheba. The Gospel of Matthew traces Jesus' line through Solomon rather than Nathan. Undoubtedly, what was most important to both writers was showing that Jesus can trace his earthly lineage straight back to David. This relationship was the key to Jesus' being able to fulfill the promise that God made to David. I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. In verse 32, we find that this verse brings us back to the story of Ruth. Jesse was David's father, Obed his grandfather, and so on. Some names are probably omitted here, as Boaz likely lived near the end of the time of the judges, whereas Salmon lived during the initial days of conquest in the promised land. Nahshon was the tribal leader of Judah during the wilderness period. Thank you so very much for listening. Join me soon for the next reading of the Sunday School lesson with intermittent commentary. Stay safe and may God bless.